7th standard geography part second. In this part we are going to learn about the centrifugal and the gravitational force. Last period we will learn about this concept, the centrifugal force and the gravitational force. That means at that time the earth is rotates. At that time the force which is away from the center of the earth, this is known as the centrifugal force, and the force which is toward the center of the earth, this is known as the gravitational force. That means the gravitational force is also greater than the centrifugal force. This phenomena or this concept we will learn about this last period. This is the second part of this topic, and in this part, hmm, then next point is the tides. Who is telling me the definition of tides? In the first part, so we will learn about the point tides. When the sea water, which is the sometimes this water close to the sea water coast, at that time other time the sea water away from the coast, this is known as the tide. Here the following factors are responsible for the occurrence of the tide. This is the definition of tides, and we will learn about the part first. But in this part, following factors are responsible for the occurrence of the tide. That means the gravitational pull of the moons and the suns, as well as that the earth, the revolution of the earth around the sun, and the indirect revolution of moon around the sun, the centrifugal force generated due to the rotation of the earth. That means here which factor is responsible for the occurrence of the tide? The first, the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun, as well as the earth. That means the gravitational pull or the gravitational pulls of the sun, the moon, the earth, these are the responsible for the appearance of the tide. And the second, revolution of the earth around the sun. That is second, which factor is the responsible for the occurrence of the tide? The revolution of the earth. That means the revolution of the earth is also responsible for the occurrence of the tide. Revolution of the earth around the sun and indirect revolution of the moon around the sun. That means the indirect revolution of moon around the sun. This is the factor which affecting on the occurrence of the tide. The centrifugal force generated due to the rotation of the earth. That means the centrifugal force which is generated due to the rotation of the earth. That means the centrifugal force, gravitational force, the sun, the moon. This factor is affecting on the occurrence of the tide. Here given occurrence of the tide. Here given one diagram. Here given one diagram. Then North Pole, North Pole. Then high tide. Here high tide, high, and here high tide, and here centrifugal force. Centrifugal force. Then here gravitational force. Here here is gravitational force, and here high tide, high tide, high tide. And here also low tide, low tide, low tide, and here centrifugal force, and here gravitational force. Hmm? Here, this is the diagram of the appearance of the tide. The moon is closer to the earth than the sun, hence it is the gravitational force become more effective than the sun. That means the moon is close to the earth. That means at that time the moon is close to the earth than the sun, hence its gravitational force become more effective. That means at that time the moon is close to the earth than sun. That means the moon is closer to the earth than sun, hence the gravitational force become more effective than the sun. That means at that time the gravitational force is more effective than the sun. Tides occurs to the relative position of the moon, and at that time this relative position tide is occurring the sun and the earth, position of the moon, the sun, the earth, the place on the earth located at the opposite point of the places expressing high or low tide, also experienced high or low tides respectively at the same time. This is the result of the centrifugal force. See figure 3.6 and try understanding the location of the high and low tide on the earth. That means at that time the moon close to the earth at that time than the sun. Hmm? Then that means the moon close to the earth than the sun. At that time the gravitational force become more effective. That means this is a gravitational force is more effective than the sun. The more effective than the sun. And tides occurs tides occurs due to the relative position of the moon, sun, and the earth. That means at that time the tides is occurring to the relative position moon, sun, and the earth. The place on the earth located at the opposite point, that means place of the earth in the opposite side or the opposite point, they expressing high and low tide. That means at that time the opposite places or the opposite position, that means at that time the opposite point of places expressing high or low tides, also experience high or low tides respectively at the same time. That means at that time high tides and low tides is respectively the same time. This is the result of the centrifugal force. That means this is the result of the centrifugal force. Figure 3.6 and understanding this high tide and low tide of the on the earth. Then, when there is a high tide at the 0 meridians, the 180 meridians also experience a high tide. That means at that time 0 meridian also uh, experienced the high tides. At that time 180 meridians also experienced the high tide. That means ज्या वेळेला 0 मेरिडियन्सला काय असतो हाय टाइड्स असतो त्यावेळेला जनरली 180 डिग्रीला सुद्धा काय असतो हाय टाइड असतो. The meridians that are right angled to those having high tides will experience low tides at the same time. If it is a high tide is 0 and 180 meridians, then at that meridians with low tide occurs. That means the meridians that are at the right angle to those having high tide. That means right angle having a high tide will experience low tides at the same time. That means high tides and low tide also at the same time. If it is the high tide at the 0 degrees and the 0 degrees and 180 80 meridians, then at the meridians will be low tide occurring. That means at that time the low tide occurring. The type of tides. Next, the types of tides. At the time of the tides varies every day. The range of the tides also keep on the changing. Generally, the highest high tides occurs on the full moon and new moon day varies on the day of the first and third quarters, and the high tide is at its minimum. Spring tides and neap tides are the two types of the tides. That means here given the two types of the tides. Hmm? Here, next point is the types of tides. Then types of tides. How many types of tides? Tides, two types. Which type? First is the spring tide. And second is the neap tide. Second is the neap tide. How many types of tides? Two types of tides. First is the spring tides and second is the neap tides. Here, then at the timing of the tide varies every day. That means at the occurrence of the tide is varies every day. That means timing of the occurrence of the tide is every day is changes. The range of the tides also keep on changing. That means the ranges of this tide is also changing every day, every time. Generally, the highest high tide occur on full moon day and new moon day, whereas on the day of the first and third quarter, this high tide is at its minimum. This spring tide and the neap tides are also two type of tides. That means generally the highest high tide occurs on full moon day. That means the highest or higher high or highest high tides occurs on which day? Full moon and new moon day. You understanding? The highest high tide occurring on the moon or new moon day, whereas on the day of the first and the third quarter. That means this is the whereas on the day of the first and third quarter, this high tide is at a minimum. That means it is a high tide. It is a minimum, and these two types of the tides. First is the spring tide and second is the neap tide. These are the two types of tides. That means spring tide and the neap tide. This is the two type of the tide. You understand definition of tide and the two type of the tide. Definition of tide. This is based on the definition. These are the two types of tides, spring tides and the neap tides. Thank you.